All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to September's edition of Challenge Chat. This is our monthly lunchtime program at Soldiers Memorial. We had intended to attempt to have this program in person and return to that format, but given recent safety and health concerns over the Delta variant of the COVID pandemic, we decided that it would be best to once again hold this program virtually. Program is meant to be more conversational in tone than a lot of our programs, and so we hope that you'll enjoy that aspect rather than just a kind of a presentation from a scholar or a historian. This is a conversation with people who actually lived and experienced history and are a critical part of that history. While the program is virtual, Soldiers Memorial is open to the public. So if you're interested in visiting, we're open Wednesday through Sunday. There are some safety precautions in place. You do not need to pre-register to visit, and we would love to have you visit if you feel safe. I want to thank all of the members of the Missouri Historical Society, especially those of the Soldiers Memorial Giving Circle. Your support is tremendously appreciated, and it helps us do multiple programs and exhibitions that we are able to do here at Soldiers Memorial. If you are not a member, but you're interested in becoming a member, I'll place a link in the chat box you'll be able to find, and you can copy that and paste it into your browser. And from there, you'll get more information on the membership program. We're going to run about 30 to 40 minutes today. We'll save some time at the end for a little Q&A. If you do have a question, you'll find on your toolbox in your Zoom window, it says Q&A, question and answer. If you click on that, you can briefly type in your question there, and we'll get to it from that avenue. So load the questions into there, and we'll get those addressed as quickly as we can. Today's presentation is being recorded. It's very important to know. So if you'd like to share it with others, and I think you will after the presentation, I think you'll find this something that others are very interested in watching and listening to. We encourage you to share that, and you'll find that on the Missouri Historical Society's YouTube channel, where not only this program, but multiple other programs that have been virtual from the Historical Society and from Soldiers Memorial can be found. And finally, your feedback is always important to us. At the end of the session here, there'll be it's called a Kobo Toolbox survey, which will open in another tab in your browser, your internet browser. So keep an eye out for that. And if you have some time and would be gracious enough, please provide us a little bit of feedback that can help us with further programs. That's all I have as far as boilerplate goes. I'd like to introduce this month's guest, Staff Sergeant Joshua Eckhoff, United States Army retired. And I'm going to kind of skip the introduction because we're going to be talking with Sergeant Eckhoff and sharing his experiences. So that'll serve in way of introduction. So good afternoon, Joshua.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here, and thanks for taking the time out. You know, as we had talked previously, I think one is, as we come upon the 20th anniversary of 9/11, we've been asking a lot of questions here at Soldiers Memorial as far as individuals who have served and been directly impacted, because as we all know, 9/11 is a very specific day, but there were events that led up to that, and then there's been a large amount of history and important service that has occurred after that day, and you were certainly a part of that. So just reading your bio quickly, I know that you were a 2003 graduate of Parkway South High School. Is that right?
That's correct.
But prior to that, you actually began your involvement with the Army National Guard. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about that? What you were
I was
experiencing at
raised
that
in
time?
I was raised in a very patriotic family. In fact, I spent a lot of time down at Soldier Memorial as a child and visiting all of the exhibits growing up. So I knew I wanted to serve from an early age. And then the events of 9/11 certainly furthered that desire to serve. So as a junior, I enlisted in the Army National Guard.
As I understand, you're one of the unique individuals that required the parent's signature, right? Because you were just a tad young to go it alone at that time.
That is correct.
Yeah. And your mother, who I understand has played an incredibly important role in your recovery and in your entire life, obviously, was able to do that for you.
Indeed, it's a strange turn of events that she was the one that signed for me to join the military, and then she was the one that came home that day after I was injured to be told that I had died in combat in Baghdad.
So she was actually told that you had died in combat.
Right. The information lag from the battlefield was such that she later that evening she got a call to tell her that I had been critically wounded, but they didn't know if I would make it or not.
Wow. That's yeah. I didn't know that aspect of the story. I can't. For a mother to receive that call, I don't know what that's like. I can't put myself in those shoes. But let's step back a little bit and talk about how that phone call came to be and how we got to that point. You had joined the Army National Guard in 2002. And your first deployment to Iraq was in February 2004. Is that?
That's correct.
And what were your activities there?
On my first tour, I was responsible for convoy security, and we were also additionally tasked with running a training academy for new Iraqi security forces. As a platoon, we ran this academy.
And what was that like? Working with the Iraqi security forces?
It was a very engaging opportunity because I was young and I wanted to get my hands there and get involved with the populace as much as I could and learn as much as I could from them and try to relate the skills that I had as an American soldier to somehow help them stand up a security force of their own.
Did they seem eager to do that, or were they reluctant volunteers? Or
It was hard to tell because we never really knew who we were getting as far as whether they were people that genuinely wanted to serve and help their country, or if they were just coming in for the skill set to potentially be used against us. And even to this day, I don't know who I trained.
oh, yeah, that's an aspect that I hadn't considered. Is that there's that, I guess, a bit of a double-edged sword there, you might
Right.
call it, where you're actually training people who might use the skills that you've provided against you, which is probably terrifying. Did that impact your thinking as you went about your day-to-day operations trying to achieve that mission, or was there any way to kind of gauge or
We had to
pull out?
separate ourselves from that kind of thinking because we had to really try to focus on giving them the best training we could. I couldn't constantly be thinking this person may or may not turn on me with this information.
Yeah,
So it was a conflicted time for sure.
yeah, yeah. I mean, our nation has done that in other places as well. We did that in Vietnam and did it in Afghanistan as well, where we
Yeah.
tried to train and bring a military up to our standards or expectations. Hmm. So you did that. You were there for a year. That was a full year was your first deployment. Is that right?
About 13 months the first time. Yes, that's right.
And that was pretty typical at that time for a
It
deployment to
was.
Iraq. Yeah. Okay. And then you came home, and then you had a domestic mess to deal with. What was that?
Well, I came home, and because I was in the National Guard, I was able to get re-enrolled in school right away.
Okay.
So I was actually going to the University of Missouri St. Louis at the time, and I had just gotten re-enrolled for classes. And I was heading back after a day of classes to my apartment, I got a call from my armory to tell me I needed to report directly to the armory. It was right when Hurricane Katrina hit, so we responded to Hurricane Katrina, and Rita was down there for missed another semester responding to state emergency duty activation.
So I just saw that again now that, the National Guard has been deployed to deal with Ida.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, so it's when I saw that in your story that you had been deployed to Katrina, it made me wonder more specifically what types of activities were you engaged in? What did they have you doing when you were there?
well, as an engineering company, we were mainly tasked with trying to clear some of the roadways, and then once we cleared the roadways enough to drive our large vehicles through the floodwaters, we did some rescue and recovery missions in some of the lower lying wards, and actually got some people off the tops of their homes and brought them food and water when we could.
Wow, that had to have been both incredibly challenging and rewarding at the same
It
time.
was very much.
Yeah,
It was very rewarding to have just gotten back from a combat zone and then overseas, and then come home and be able to serve my fellow citizens in a way that I had been serving overseas, and not feeling like I was directly benefiting my own country all the time.
right, right. Yeah, it's very interesting. Huh. So you were there for 6 weeks?
Approximately.
Yeah, about 6. And then you came back and started school again, right? Do I have
Right.
that? So fits
My
determination, right?
my education was very piecemeal. I got it in when I could.
But you kept at it.
I did.
And what was your overarching goal? Did you have a degree in mind at the time, or?
When I initially started at the university, I was double majoring in English and political science, but I wanted to, in my overall plan, I wanted to go to law school.
Okay,
But then I ended up volunteering in 2007 to go back to Iraq to lead a critical route clearance team in and around Baghdad.
that was in October of 2007. So
That's correct.
okay, so you've been home, I guess, a couple of years then, following your initial
Right,
deployment. Yeah,
right.
okay. And then you volunteered for the second deployment, you said.
I did. Well, I had, in those years in between Katrina and volunteering for the second deployment, I had been asked by the state adjutant general to go get a specialized task training at Fort Leonard Wood to learn essentially how to deal with the improvised explosive devices and to render them safe,
Okay.
which is what that skill set is what enabled me to lead this route clearance team that I went back to lead in 2007.
So that was with the 1138th. Is that how you say that?
That's correct.
Engineer company. Okay. And you were a sapper, right?
That's correct.
So tell us all what that word. That's not a word that many of our folks will be familiar with. What does a sapper mean, or what does a sapper do?
So a sapper is essentially a specialized combat engineer in the same sense that a ranger is a specialized infantryman.
Okay.
Just we get additional training. So a sapper is essentially more proficient in demolitions and small unit tactics than a normal combat engineer would be.
So you were trained to look for and identify and locate improvised explosive devices that have been planted along traditional convoy routes. Is that
Correct.
yeah, I get that right. Okay. So what are you looking for? Are you allowed to talk about that, or
Yeah, I am now. Basically, you're looking for any abnormalities, and you learn to look for certain signature um, trademarks like wires, and you eventually learn where they like to lay these types of devices. So you're looking for any kind of ground disturbance where something may have been buried, and then anything that they might be camouflaging it with, like trash or unusual debris that doesn't belong.
Okay,
And because we had run these routes so frequently, we would learn kind of what did and didn't belong.
okay. So you learn, I think probably that's a lot of what a professor taught me is the definition of wisdom, which is both knowledge and experience combined, right?
Exactly.
You can get the classroom training and you get the knowledge, but it takes that experience before you really have the wisdom to know what you're looking for and where it might be um, and things of that nature. Huh. And that's that's really brave, Joshua. that's that's incredibly brave. I don't know. I mean, you and your team were the ones that were attempting to identify and locate these devices before others ran across them, basically. So it was that's an enormous challenge and an incredibly brave thing to do. I'm sure you grasp what I'm saying. I'm just it's remarkable, and I
Thank
don't.
you. I'm very
And
I'm very proud of the mission that we did. And I like to tell people now that I'll never know how many lives we saved by successfully completing our missions prior to the day that I was injured.
right.
We cleared
And
hundreds of devices.
yeah, and these devices weren't just impacting U.S. soldiers; they were impacting. I got to assume, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume that they were impacting communities and civilians that were living in the area as well.
Definitely. And they would have as frequently injured the Iraqi civilians and the other coalition forces as they would US forces. These types of devices don't discriminate.
Yeah. So you knew this is what you were getting into when you volunteered in that fall. That this was going to be the mission.
I did. In fact, I can recall wanting to do this mission before I got involved in it.
Right. And it's kind of a like you said, it's an elevated, it's a uh, more rigorously trained and more thoroughly trained level of engineer in the U.S. Army. I got that correct?
You've got it exactly correct.
Okay. So if you're comfortable, tell us about February 6, 2008.
Of course. So it was a regular day like any other. Basically, the way our missions worked, there's an overarching battle plan for the battle space that the generals have, and so they need to send one group from point A to point B. They would contact my team and say, okay, we've got a follow-on mission for this area. We need you guys to go run this route and make sure it's clear and safe for the mission that's going to follow behind you to go. So I got those orders and then I briefed my team. We went out and ran our route and successfully cleared it. And then at the end of the route, I called it cleared. Our standard operating procedure was to drive back the way we had already cleared. Unfortunately, the enemy had seen us do this so many times they came in behind my patrol and placed an armored defeating device. They came through the door of my armored vehicle and hit me square in the right side of my Kevlar helmet, concaving into the right hemisphere of my brain. So I sustained I sustained a career-ending combat injury on February 6th of 2008. Severe traumatic brain injury.
And in that vehicle, you mentioned your team. How many members are on that team?
When I mention the team, I'm actually talking about all of the patrol. But
Okay.
in my vehicle, there were probably 1, 2, 5 of us.
Okay. And you all have different. You're all taking on different aspects of the mission.
Right.
And what was your? You were the team lead.
I was the TC, or the truck commander of that vehicle, and we were, as the leader of the route clearance team, my truck always ran in the front of the patrol, which is naturally the most dangerous place to be because you encounter the devices first.
Right. And you lost a member of the team on that day as well.
I did. Unfortunately, Staff Sergeant Bradley Skelton, who was interestingly my team leader on my first deployment to Iraq in 2004, he had served enough years to actually separate from the Missouri Army National Guard. So he had retired, and then he came out of retirement when he learned that I was going back for this more dangerous mission. And Brad was always with me in my vehicle, seated directly behind me. Unfortunately, Brad died on the day that I was injured. He was hit by a second armor defeating device that came in behind my seat and hit Brad's center mass.
Yeah. Ooh. So you were unconscious. I think your teammates believed that that you were killed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And
They got me back to Camp Liberty, where we were based out of there in Baghdad, and the initial reports were that I wasn't going to survive my injuries. So that's what they were told initially, just like my mom was told the same thing.
so that's when she was contacted sometime soon after that.
Right.
But you're a fighter, and
Apparently.
and you weren't done yet.
Yeah.
Not yet. So where did they? So what was your route from Camp Liberty?
Well, they correctly assessed that my brain was swelling so quickly, it was putting my brainstem in jeopardy. So they medevaced me from Liberty to Balad, where the surgical team was in country, to do a craniectomy to remove an additional piece of my skull to allow my brain to swell more and not jeopardize my brainstem, which was essentially the first brain surgery I had of 6 that would be required after my injury.
Oh wow! I knew you had that one. So you had 5 more brain surgeries following that. And were those all related to pressure-related issues and bleeding and things like that, or?
Yes, and well, one of them, when I got back stateside, I was recovering in the Minneapolis VA Medical Center in Minnesota for about 13 months, where I had to relearn everything. And while there, I developed a staph infection in my wound site of my brain. So they had to fly me to Bethesda for an additional surgery to clean out the infection.
So from Balad, you went to Minneapolis?
Well, from Balad, I went to Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, where I was in a medically induced coma for a number of weeks.
Okay.
Before I made it to Minneapolis.
And then Minneapolis is where you began your rehab?
Correct.
And tell us about that. What does that look like?
Well, I had to relearn everything. When I woke up initially in Minneapolis, I was being fed through a tube. I couldn't speak. I couldn't swallow. We learned how to walk, everything.
Challenging days, I'm sure.
Very.
But then you did recover, and you did rehab well. How is that's still ongoing, I would assume?
It's still ongoing, man.
Some aspects. And what's do you want to assess that or discuss how the ongoing part of it is?
I'm not in formal therapies anymore at this stage in my recovery, but I'm still doing my own holistic types of activities for recovery. I still feel like I'm getting better day by day.
And tell us about school. How did schooling shape out?
While I was in Minneapolis, I started a long distance. After I got out of the acute rehab part of my Minneapolis journey, I had been to like a step down, more of an independent unit, where I was learning to be more independent with my disabilities. And while there, I started a long distance independent study with my advisor from the University of Missouri St. Louis, which was kind of a fact-finding mission to see what what academic skills I had retained given my brain trauma, and seeing what it would take to get me back to the university and to try to complete my degree, which she and I both knew was my goal.
They forgot to put the quit in you.
Yeah, I guess so.
So you got back into school and
Got back into school, and I finished with a BA in liberal studies in 2014, which was a minor in my honors program and a minor in psychology.
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's really neat. And not only that, but the other aspects of the recovery and the rehab are just truly inspiring to all of us who grumble about our coffee's cold or what else isn't going right today. It's inspirational and a reminder that to not give up and to keep fighting. I know that you've been involved. We work a lot in many different ways with different veteran service organizations at Soldiers Memorial. So I was kind of curious about that. It looks like the Joshua Chamberlain Society is one that you've been directly supported by and involved with. Can you tell us a little bit about what the Chamberlain Society has meant to you and kind of how they're supporting other veterans?
I can. So the Joshua Chamberlain Society is a very unique mission in that we adopt our heroes. And when I say heroes, I mean people like myself and other post 9/11 veterans that have sustained life-changing injuries that will be with them for the remainder of their lives. So we adopt these heroes in the true meaning of the word, adopt them for the rest of their life to provide take care of any additional needs they have that the VA or other organizations won't take care of. So in my case, I was contacted when I was ready to leave Minneapolis. I couldn't initially move home because I wasn't independent enough to live on my own with my injuries. So I needed to move back in with my parents. And at the time, they didn't have an ADA accessible bathroom for me to use. So when the society learned about this, they approached me to make me their first hero. And the first thing they did was come in and remodel the bathroom at my parents' house so that I could move home from Minneapolis and continue my rehab here in St. Louis, closer to friends and family.
And that's their focus is, it's very directed, intensive support of individuals rather than trying to cast too wide of a net. Is that
Exactly.
a fair way to sum that up? Have you been involved with other veteran service organizations or other, Mission Continues or?
I was a Mission Continues fellow.
And I just kind of curious is all of those. It sounds like the Chamberlain Society especially has been meaningful to you. I think one thing that we talk a little bit about here at Soldiers that we've had some internal and some external conversations about is that there are a lot of veteran service organizations, and a lot of them have very targeted missions, and some of them are much kind of broader and provide more of a broad nature of support. But it sounds like you were able to connect and find support that you needed within the veteran community.
Very much so.
I
was very lucky to be well connected when I got back to St. Louis and find these wonderful resources that have assisted me in my recovery to this point.
And it sounds like you've spent probably a great deal of time with the VA specifically, I would imagine.
I have.
Yeah,
I've had tremendous support from the VA from the beginning.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's really nice to hear. Of course, they're one that comes under attack more often than anything.
Yeah, they get a lot of scrutiny.
Yeah, it's good to hear that you got the support that you needed for that. Excellent. So what's if you're comfortable talking about it, what's the future look like for you? What's the next few years and things of that nature? How's that all shaping up?
Well, I've written a book about my experiences and my injury and recovery, and I'm currently looking to try to publish that.
Okay, excellent. That, and it's completed and you're looking for a publisher?
It is.
All right, so viewers out there who know a publisher, and I know some of them know, some of them will. Let's think about Staff Sergeant Eckhoff's book. I wanted to find, I wanted to read something that you wrote, Joshua, and this is from the Chamberlain Society. This is because I just found this movie and it's again another important lesson for us. This was a letter to Mrs. Morrison and her class, which were at the school that you had left, and you talked about kindness and hope, and a reminder that we're all in this together. But I'm going to take a moment just to read this because it's a poignant reminder. I challenge you to shower those around you with kindness, not only your friends, but more importantly, your enemies. Sometimes the simple kindness of an honest smile can provide someone with just enough hope to make it through the day. You may never know the effect that your kindness has on certain people, but know this: a kind word or act often inspires hope in those who need it most. I have seen the glimmer of hope in an Iraqi child's eyes, and I assure you that hope, like kindness, transcends cultural and racial barriers. In this time of war, I challenge you to show unconditional kindness to those around you and to inspire hope in every life that you touch. So you've touched a lot of lives. I know that, Staff Sergeant Eckhoff. You've saved a lot of lives in the work that you did in Iraq, and you made lives better for people living there. And we are all very grateful. And certainly your examples of kindness and hope are ones that we need to ingrain in all of ourselves. And so just want to thank you. And I think we have a couple of questions here that have come in. So before we wrap, I wanted to get to these real quickly. One is, what is one thing you wish more people knew about the Middle East or current events in Afghanistan? That's two questions, but it all came in the same comment.
I think one thing I'd like everybody to know is that despite the cultural differences and the religious differences, there's a shared humanity between the peoples in America and the peoples in the Middle East. I think that the cost has been staggering for me personally to learn that, and the cost has been staggering for us as a nation in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Do you have thoughts about current events in Afghanistan?
I don't know that I have thoughts that are really
Sure.
formulated enough to speak to at this time.
Okay. And what about your recovery? What was your biggest inspiration working through all that months and months and years and ongoing recovery and rehabilitation? What's been your inspiration?
My inspiration has probably been my mother. She's been by my side throughout the entirety of my rehab. She's been my caregiver. Once I've made it back home, and anytime I need something, she's been there to support me.
Excellent. And one last comment. Thank you, Sergeant Eckhoff, for sharing your story and your dedicated service to American ideals. And I certainly echo that. And I want to just thank you for taking the time that you've taken with us. I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to discuss that we haven't, or
I want to thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for
Appreciate it.
Yeah, and we'll be wishing you the best in further rehabilitation. And I'm not worried about you because you got more you got more fight and determination than 99% of the people I know. So I think you're going to be just fine. So, but you definitely will be in my thoughts, and wishing you all the best as you proceed. And we'll certainly look forward to seeing you down here at Soldiers Memorial sometime. I'm sure of that. So, all right. Thank you, Staff Sergeant Etkoff. You have a good
Thank
day
you.
and enjoy the rest of your week.
Do the same.
Bye.
Bye.